Hey everyone, my name is Brian Hilbert. I've been a fly fishing guide for 20 years now and currently guide doing walk and wade trips and float trips here in Colorado and Wyoming. Super pumped to be with AvidMax today and tie some of my patterns that I've come up with over the years. I've fooled trout all over the Rockies with these patterns we're going to tie. These are some of my most confident fly patterns for fooling trout, both on technical tailwaters and freestones. If you'd like to get in touch with me or have questions about the patterns or would like to book a guide trip, you can find me on Instagram at Brian C. Hilbert, or you can contact AvidMax. I'd love to get in touch with you guys. Let's get into tying. My Salmon Fly Bugger. This is a salmon fly nymph that can also be fished like a streamer. It's got a really cool profile. Has that pretty unique wing case, that kind of armor plate wing case like salmon flies have. I first came up with this when I moved to Colorado. I was doing a lot of float trips on the Colorado River in the upper section, and we have a fair amount of salmon flies up there, and everybody is pretty into trying to catch those fish on a salmon fly adult. And why not? It's really fun to watch a big trout come up and eat a big size 4 or size 6 dry fly. However, I think we're leaving a lot on the table when it comes to fishing the salmon fly hatch from a subsurface standpoint. Every fish that I was catching up there, you could feel how many salmon fly nymphs were in their belly. It just felt like they were full of gravel every time I picked them up. Every seine that I took was loaded with salmon fly nymphs. Every fish in the net was puking them up. And I wanted to come up with something better than just fishing a black Pat's Rubber Legs. Now, nothing against the Pat's Rubber Legs, it's a great fly. I think this one is a massive improvement and features a lot of key trigger points that make the trout want to eat it whenever salmon flies are present. The first thing is the profile. This marabou tail is going to be real slender and moving around a lot here at the back while that thing is drifting through the current. And this double wing case here really matches that, like I said, armor plated wing case with that those salmon flies exhibit. It's got a lot of legs and hackle that are going on here to give it good movement. Just an all around cool pattern. You can fish this in a variety of ways. You can dead drift this below an indicator. You can fish it underneath a dry dropper. Just put this a foot or two below your favorite salmon fly adult. Or you can actually, what my preferred method to do is to fish this like a streamer, where you're just gonna fish it with a floating line, casting it towards the bank, and do some intermittent twitch, pulling it off the bank. You're gonna go twitch and pause for a few seconds, twitch and pause for a few seconds, and this thing is an absolute devastator on the river. Really pumped to show it to you guys. It looks like it's gonna be a complex tie. I promise you it's not. It's actually super simple. We're gonna get right into it here, guys. All right, so for a hook, we're gonna go with the Tiemco 200R. And I got just a countersunk 4mm tungsten black nickel bead on it. You can certainly go no bead, or you can do this with a brass bead, depending on the type of weight that you're needing for your application. So the first thing we're gonna do is tie in our antenna. I'm using 6/0 black uni thread. And we're gonna slide this bead forward over this antenna tie-in point. So it's important we don't crowd this tie-in when we do our antenna. And the sequence I like to use is I'm going to start my thread right behind the hook eye and just do 5 or 6 turns rearward to start my thread. We're going to trim off the excess there. For the antenna, I'm going to use small round rubber leg in black, and what I want to do is just lay that on top of the hook and capture it at the back of my tie-in point there. And I'm going to advance my thread towards the hook eye with touching turns. And what's going to happen is my thread torque is going to position that antenna to the far side, like so. I'm going to take the rear remaining piece of that round rubber leg and pull it forward to the near side and capture it. Now all I'm going to do is wrap rearward, covering up those butt ends until I reach bare hook shank. I'm going to do a quick whip finish. Pull that tight and trim my thread. Now I can slide my bead over, and you can see that slides over real easy and gives us that nice splayed antenna look coming out the front of the bead. We'll take this time to just give those a rough trim, about like so. Now you'll notice my whip finish is exposed off the back of the bead, and that allows me to start my thread right on top of where we left off, and that'll pretty much ensure that that antenna tie-in point never comes apart. All right, I'm going to lay down a good thread base here, and just wrapping rearward, and I want to go until my thread is about even with the barb. So if I'm hanging down, I'm right here on the barb of the hook. Now for a tail, we're just going to use some strung marabou or woolly bugger marabou, whatever you got laying around. You don't need to necessarily use your good stuff on this. We just want a nice full feather for a tail. I'm going to select one here, and we're going to trim off some of this gunk on the bottom. I just like to pull it and strip it right off. So we're about like so. I'm then going to trim about 1.5 inches of the tip right off the tip of that feather. So we're rough with this. Now when I sweep all this towards the back of the feather, I should have a bunch of fibers that are about even. What I'll do is I'll bring my fingers all the way back, and if I have any of these stray tips like you see in here, I'll keep that pinch going on my, oops, I dropped it there. I'll keep that pinch going in my left hand, and I'll take those short fibers and just sweep them back and pull those off. I want to try to keep all my tail tips even. All right, we're going to tie this marabou tail just like you would on a woolly bugger. I'm going to do it just slightly longer than the shank of the hook, right on top. I'm going to wrap that forward with 5 or 6 really good firm wraps, so we have that tail coming right out the back here. Now, if I were to just try to wrap this feather forward, you're going to notice it wants to twist on you and roll away from you a lot. A little trick I like to do is just pull this up and do some open turns all the way to the bead. We're going to lay that feather down, capture it, give it a couple turns, trim off that excess, and now we can clean up the rest of that feather without having to argue with it rolling away from us. So I'm just going to go down and back. Next we're going to tie in a rib. This is going to be some brassy ultra wire in hot orange. We're going to take off about a 5 or 6 inch segment here and tie it in at the back of the bead, wrapping rearward. I'm going to let thread tension take it to the far side, and we'll just let that hang right off the back and advance our thread forward a couple of turns. Now the abdomen and body of this fly is just some black chenille, and I'm going to pull a little bit of those fibers off, exposing the core, and then I'm going to tie this in right by that core, all the way at the front of our tail, and advance this forward to about the halfway point. Now a good trick you can use to get your proportions down, if you're looking to measure whether you're halfway or not, you can just use your scissors. So I'm going to put this here where my thread is into the eye. I'm going to take that same measurement and put it to the rear, and I can see that that's exactly halfway. Really important on this fly to make sure these proportions are correct, and we want to get that thread and our tie-off point for this material right in the middle of the hook there. All right, so we're then going to take this chenille and we're going to do some tight wraps forward, making a nice bushy little body. And we're going to come all the way up, capture it, a couple of turns. I'll come in and trim that, set that aside, we'll be needing it again. I'm going to clean up that tie-off point with a few turns, and then I like to get my dubbing brush in here, and through wrapping that chenille, a lot of those fibers end up getting trapped. I want to make sure my body stays nice and full. I'm just going to give this a nice scrub and make sure everything is out and fluffy and happy and looking good. All right, the next thing we're gonna do is palmer this wire forward and give it a rib. So I'm gonna wrap pretty even turns here all the way forward. It ends up being about 5 or 6. We're gonna come up to bare hook shank, do a wrap with the wire, and then capture it. I'm gonna capture 5 or 6 turns of thread there, and I'm just gonna hold my bobbin tight and helicopter this wire off until it breaks. We'll clean up a little bit of our work there, and I want to pick this out again. Okay, looking good. All right, next we're going to tie in our legs. Now you can use Life Flex, Band Flex, Montana Fly Company Sexy Floss, whatever rubber leg material you prefer. It's really not critical. And we're going to take a piece of this rubber leg like so, and I'm going to face this rearward right on top of the hook. I'm going to do a wrap, and you'll notice that thread tension took it to the far side. I'm going to wrap it rearward a couple of turns to secure it on that far side of the hook, about like so. I'm going to leave my thread in that position and pull the remaining piece that's facing forward, rearward, and capture it. This will allow me to tie in both legs with one piece of material. It will eliminate waste and speed up the tying process. We're going to give these just a rough trim. They don't have to be perfect yet. We're then going to tie in a hackle, and I just got some hen hackle here. This is just a dark brown grizzly. You can certainly use black or whatever you want to kind of match salmon flies in your area. Usually they're a dark color. They're this kind of dark brown or black. So I'm going to select a feather where the fibers are just a little bit longer than the hook gap. I'm going to take and to prep this, pull a lot of this fluffy stuff off of the feather, okay? And I'm going to trim, leaving about 1/8 of an inch of that stem. Now you'll notice there's a concave side to this feather and a natural curve. I want the underside of the feather facing rear. And I'm going to trim off about 1/8 of an inch of fibers, leaving these little bit of stubs here. And this is going to help that feather grab and not pull out. Now when I tie in a soft hackle or any hackle feather, I like to do the figure 8 technique, where I'm actually going to hold this vertical and do a wrap so that point is facing me. I have 1 turn of thread holding the feather like so. I then am going to come in front of the butt end, lift the feather up, and come around behind. So I've basically done an X wrap on that feather. Now I'm going to take this feather and lift up and pull it rearward. I'm going to wrap over the stem with a couple of turns. And what that does is completely lock in that feather to where it can't be pulled out. I'm then going to grab my handy CNF Design hackle pliers. These are my favorite hackle pliers. They seem to just work really well for working with any kind of hackle feather or small soft hackles, or even working with biots. Okay, so I'm going to trim this up. We're ready to wrap this hackle. Now, a little trick here. A lot of people I see just sweep this rearward. You'll notice they just bounce back into position. What I want to do is pinch these fibers down, squeeze my thumb and index together, and I'm going to twist and roll my finger together. And what this does is it creases those fibers and makes them stay rearward. This will aid us as we wrap this hackle feather and prevent us from capturing hackle fibers going forward. You're just going to pinch and roll it between your fingers. Be real careful not to break the stem. It takes a little bit of practice, but that's kind of a neat trick to keep all those fibers facing rearward. And then I'm going to wrap this 2 turns, sweeping that back. I'm going to hold that feather straight up. I'm going to wiggle my thread till it's in the upright position, and then if I pull that feather forward, it opens up a gap for my thread to come down, and it prevents me from trapping in unnecessary wanted hackle fibers, and then I can secure it. We're going to come in and trim that stem, sweep everything back, clean it up, kind of coax these rearward. Okay. Now, I'm going to take and isolate the top of these, and I'm going to trim these out, and you're going to see why here in a moment. Just the ones on top there, so we kind of look like this. All right, so the wing pad, this is probably the most difficult part. I'm going to switch scissors here, grab my craft scissors, and I'm going to use either thin skin or Duraskin, and this comes in just a sheet like so. This is a really neat material. It's pretty durable and has a nice texture to it. It's that matte color. It's going to give us a nice kind of armored wing case, armored plate look that those salmon fly nymphs exhibit. You'll have to play around a little bit with getting the size correct on this. The best advice I can give you is we're going to cut a square about the length of our tie-in process here, where we have material on the hook, and the width is going to be about 1.5 the gap of the hook. Okay, and it's going to be arts and crafts time here a little bit. What we're going to do is cut out this piece into a shape of a Y. Think of the YMCA logo. I'm going to come straight up here. I'll try to do this to where you can see it on camera, and then I'm going to come out to an angle. I'm going to flip it over, do the same thing on this side. Come up and out to an angle, so we have like a YMCA logo, right? Now, we're going to turn that around, go to the very top. I'm going to cut out just a little notch in that Y to make those horns. Those salmon fly nymphs have really distinct, pointy, almost horn-like pieces that come out off the back of their wing case. It's a very distinct part of the profile of the insect. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're just looking for something that looks like this. Okay, so switch my scissors back here, and we're gonna take this and lay it right on top, and I want the end of the base of that Y to be right where I left off on my hackle. So we're going to capture that with a turn of thread and just wrap forward almost to the bead, but not quite. I'm going to push that material rearward and fold it over itself and secure it down, and what that does is it ensures that that will never pull out. I'll clean that up a little bit and wrap just a little more rearward to where like so. You want that centered, maybe covering up half of that abdomen. Okay, and essentially what we're going to do is just repeat the process there. I'm going to expose the core on some of the chenille. I'm going to tie that in. I'm going to advance my thread all the way to the bead. We're going to wrap this guy with some tight turns forward to just about to the bead, leaving just a small amount of space there. Capture it with a couple of turns and trim it out. A little bit of fluff there when you trim that chenille. We'll just brush that out. I'm going to use my dubbing brush again to pick out this chenille to make it nice and fluffy. And then we're going to get into tying the legs in. Now on the front portion of this, the legs are tied in just a little bit different. I'm going to take another long strand. I'm going to come up underneath my thread, and I'm going to bring it all the way up on top. Give it a turn of thread and position that on the far side there. We want it just wedged right in between the bead, like so. I'm going to then do the same exact thing on the near side. I'm going to bring it underneath, up over the top to the near side of the bead. Get that thing in place, do a couple of turns to where we're just real similar to how you would do hopper legs, about like so. Now it's important to minimize your thread wraps here. It's easy to get carried away. Just usually like 2 or 4 wraps to get those legs to stay in put. Everything that we do on the fly moving forward is going to get tied off in that same spot. So it's important not to get carried away with your wraps or you end up way too bulky. All right, so we're going to select another one of those Hackle feathers. I like the front one to be a little bit bigger, a little bit longer fiber length than the one we did in the back, but we're going to prep it the same way. Or we're going to trim that back. I'm going to trim off 1/8 of an inch, about like so. I'm going to do that figure 8 tie-in. I'm going to capture it facing me, come in front of the stem, around back behind the feather. I'm going to pull this rearward and wrap over that stem. Okay. And really we're just repeating the process now. I'm going to hold this up with my hackle pliers. I'm going to pinch and twist my finger and thumb. And we're just going to do 2 turns or so. Right in between those rubber legs. Now this can take a little bit of practice, just take your time. I'm going to come underneath. Same thing, I'm going to wiggle my thread up, pull the fiber or hackle feather forward, and wiggle around and end right on top of that bead there. Alright, come in here, trim out remaining hackle feather. I'm going to sweep this back a little bit. Clean a little bit of that up. We can use a dubbing brush to kind of coax everything rearward, make sure it's in place. All right, looking good. I'm gonna isolate these tops again and trim that out. And we're gonna build another wing case, little wing pad. Get my Duraskin. And this one, we're going to tie it a little bit different. We're still going to start with about the same size of piece. Okay, about like so. And this time I'm going to cut it into more of a triangle without that long arm on the Y. Okay, about like so. We're going to cut out our notch. Again, don't feel like you got to make this perfect. We're just looking for something like that. All right. So we tie this in. We're going to tie it in reverse. I want to be able to lay this over the top. So what I'm going to do is lay this on top here where I want it, to see about where I need to tie this in at. I want the base, the notch of that wing case to be right where that second one, the previous one we tied in, starts. So you'll notice I have a little bit more in a bead length and gap there. I'm going to turn this over so it's shiny side up and put that right in place on top of the hook, like so. Okay, I'm going to secure that with a wrap, make sure that's nice and centered, do a second wrap. Then we're going to grab our super glue, and I like to put just a little dab right on our thread wraps and on that butt end. And we'll take this guy and we're just going to push him rearward, fold it over and press it right onto that glue. Take a turn of thread right at the front of that material, and then we're going to whip finish. I like about a 3-turn whip finish here. This is a large whip finish tool. I really like it for this fly. Works pretty well for getting around those rubber legs. We'll trim that off, and the tying part is pretty much complete here. We're going to trim these legs to the desired length. I usually trim the ones closest to me and then come in and just match up the far side. Sweep everything back. It's not trimming very well. About like so. Okay. All right, the very last thing to do is just secure everything with some UV resin. I'm gonna come out around our thread wraps and put a pretty good coat on our whip finish, on the front of this, right up against the bead. And this will pretty much ensure that none of that ever comes undone. We'll cook it with our light. All right, and that's it. That's the Salmon Fly Bugger. Again, really effective fly anywhere that you have salmon flies. If you're not fishing the salmon fly hatch subsurface, you are absolutely missing out. This is an extremely devastating pattern. If you're ever out there fishing and they're not quite rising yet, tie one of these on, strip it off the bank, fish it like a streamer, dead drift it under an indicator, and I promise you, you're gonna have a ton of fun with this thing. It's a pretty fun tie. Once you get making these wing pad pieces down, it's actually very simple. I would put it right up there with just tying a complex woolly bugger, but overall, really, really cool pattern. I know it's gonna bring you guys a lot of success. All the materials are available here at AvidMax to purchase online. Definitely would love to see you guys tie some of these and post them to social media. Be sure to tag me, Brian Hilbert, and AvidMax. Would love to see your guys' work and would love to see these hang out at some fish's mouth here this spring. Other than that, thanks you guys again for having me, and looking forward to seeing you out on the water.